somewhat lengthy presentation because try to accomplish a lot of things in it, give you a general overview of the bar exam, but also give you a sense of what the bar exam looks like in a few of the more popular states that our students take the bar exam in. Talk a little bit about risk factors that students sometimes have that can be problematic for them when they go to take the bar exam, and then obviously we have any time left, answer any questions you guys have. How many of you guys, just before we get started, know where you're going to take the bar exam already? Okay. All right. That's pretty much most of you. That's great. All right. So talking a little bit about why the bar exam is different than what you've experienced in law school. One, it requires a pretty steady amount of work. You get a new subject almost every week, particularly in a state like Virginia where you have 23 subjects tested as well as multi-state. So you have to know state and multi-state distinctions for those particular subjects. You're getting a new subject almost every day. So you have to stay on top of things. You're doing about 60 hours or more a week. In addition, when you get to the bar exam, not only do you have to figure out the issue within that particular question, you have to figure out what the topic is, right? Because when you take a class in law school, right, you know in your torts class you're going to get a torts question. In the bar exam situation, you have to figure out first what's the topic, what are they asking about? And sometimes, as you'll see as we go forward, there are compound questions, meaning that there are multiple topics tested within a question and then multiple issues within those topics. So it can become a fairly complicated thing. And then you have to be able to manage small details, but also big picture stuff. So similar to what you've done in law school. But you're just trying to learn a lot of material in a fairly compressed amount of time. You have typically somewhere in the neighborhood of about 10 to 12 weeks of bar prep before you take the bar in the last week of July. So it's a pretty intense summer. I guess you guys, how many of you guys have talked to people who went through the bar exam last year? How many of them told you it was the best thing, most fun thing they've ever done in their life? Probably not too many. So another key difference in terms of the bar exam, particularly for the essays, is that in law school you may be used to having these sort of very broad general essays where somebody says something like discuss. You don't get those kind of questions on bar exam essays. What you're going to get is a very pointed question where they ask you to discuss a very specific subject. In addition, you have this thing called a multi-state. How many of you guys know what the multi-state is, or the MPRE, the multi-state bar exam? And so, of course, Professor Napkin knows. There's 200 multiple choice questions. It's 100 in the morning, 100 in the afternoon. You have 3 hours per 100 question set. That means you have to basically do one question every 1.8 minutes. So it's about, and I will tell you, I don't mention that just casually. And when you start getting into your bar review and bar prep, the time management in the MPE is a really key thing because if you get behind, it's really hard to get caught up. So obviously doing more practice questions and getting used to the timing of the exam is a big part of preparing for the MPE. But what that should sound like to you and what it is a pretty demanding intellectual task. You have to, not only are you dealing with the multi-state subjects, you have to figure out which subject is being tested by a particular question. You also have to figure out which of the 4 answer prompts they give you is the best, and then you have to stay on time, which is also challenging. You probably haven't done anything like that in law school. So for most students, it's the thing that you may know a little bit more about the MPE than another part of the bar exam, but it's a thing that students typically find that they have to practice a fair amount. Not to say you don't have to practice your essay writing. You absolutely should, because essay writing for the bar exam is different than writing for your law professors. But with practice on the MPE, you will get better, right? You'll start to notice that you move more quickly and that it gets easier and you start to recognize question types. Interestingly, I was talking with Professor McDonald about this. A lot of the students who took the July exam said that the MPE was very hard. That was their general sense of it. Sometimes that's just the nature of the questions that they ask. But my sense, just in talking with students, is that they feel like the MPE is getting harder, more challenging. The other thing that is very different about taking the bar exam versus your law classes is that your professor has a much longer amount of time to read your essay than the bar readers do. This is a really important point when you start thinking about how to organize your essays. Your average bar reader, you guys want to take a guess as to how much time they have to read in a state like Virginia or California, how much time they typically take to read an essay? You guys want to take a guess? Yeah. 5 minutes is pretty generous. believe it or not. It's close probably to 3, 4, something like that. We had 2 readers from the Virginia Bar come last year to talk about their experience. One, most of these people are reading outside of their area of expertise. Okay, so they typically are reading essays in an area of law which they don't even practice. So they are completely reliant upon the guidance that they get from the bar examiners, also the checklist that they've been given by the bar examiners. Also, this is not their full-time job. Many of these people take this on because they've basically been asked to by a managing partner at their firm, who happens to be on the board of bar examiners, or they volunteered for it, but it is one of many things they are trying to do. So they oftentimes get a stack of 150 essays that they have to read in a fairly compressed amount of time while trying to balance all their other things, and they're reading in a subject that they really don't know that much about. So when you think about that, and you think about how it compares to your law professor, who one, knows you, right, or sort of obviously we have anonymous grading here, but still is probably going to try to give the students in his or her class the benefit of the doubt on things, right? That is not typically how your bar reader is going to read it. You either got it right or you got it wrong. They are looking for buzzwords, they're looking for things, obviously, that indicate that you're thinking and approaching the question like a lawyer would, but at the same time, they don't give you as much credit as your law professor would just being there and writing an essay response. So let's talk a little bit about risk factors. I think this is sometimes hard for students to hear, and I want to talk a little bit of, the reason why we're talking about this is, one, it's important in terms of your own preparation for the bar exam to acknowledge if you happen to fall into one of these groups or you have a risk factor. Does that mean that you're not going to pass the bar? No, it does not mean that. It means that it's just something that you have to acknowledge, you have to think about how to minimize it, but it's not outcome determinant. So the reason why it's important to be aware of these things is if you don't actually do anything about these factors, and you sort of let them languish, don't address them, you're not proactive about it, they could potentially cause you challenges on the bar exam. So starting early, thinking about this, reflecting on your experience in law school and how that will relate to the bar exam is a really important step in terms of getting prepared for the bar exam. All right, so the first one, start off a little bit slow. So life crises are significant changes. I had a classmate that planned a wedding while she was studying for the bar exam. I would not recommend that. That did not end very well. And the sort of things that they meant, and there's lots of stories about stuff like this, like people planning weddings, significant moves, like moving while you're trying to study, like across states, moving into a house. Or getting married like immediately after the bar exam. It's just don't do any of that stuff, because all of that competes with the amount of time you have to study. And the one thing that I think, if you talk to some of the people who took the Virginia Bar, and I use the Virginia Bar a lot as an example because we have about 45 to 50 students who take it each year, the one thing that really surprised the Virginia Bar takers is how quickly they got new material every single day. Like you literally could not take a day off, because every time you came to another lecture, you were getting something else, some new topic. And it's not that Virginia's in the minority on that. New York feels similarly to students. Texas feels similarly. All these states kind of have that feel to them. So when you throw a life change, a major life change into that, all of a sudden you have something competing for your time. And the bar exam, again, we talked about preparing for the bar exam. It is 50 to 60 hours a week. So, it's not to say that life just stops, though, when you study for the bar exam, right? Occasionally you will have something happen, a breakup or something that's stressful, death in the family. It's really important in those instances, obviously, to seek help and seek support, because those can be equally challenging if they sort of go unaddressed. So, moving on to the next one. So, if you've been challenged by essay writing or multiple choice, right? Sometimes people come into law school and they have an idea about their ability as a standardized test taker. They may not be the best standardized test taker. They may not feel like they're really good at writing essay questions. As you can see, this can be problematic for the bar exam, because you have every bar exam in the country has a standardized component, and every bar exam has an essay component. So if that is the case, if you feel like you fall into that group, then as you think about your bar prep, you're going to have to do additional practice questions. Every student has to do practice questions, both MPRE and essay. And then you also have to figure out maybe what it was about that particular type of question that may have been challenging for you in law school or in prior educational experiences. and reflect on that. A lot of this is about self-reflection, but it's also about managing external commitments, as you'll see. So low law school GPA and low law school class rank. The bottom 25% is generally what student of a class is what folks in law schools generally look to when they start talking about students who are at a higher risk for not passing the bar. Our own numbers here are borne out by that. For a couple of years ago when we looked at it, the students who were in the top 75% of the class had a 95% chance of passing the Virginia bar, or pass the Virginia bar, excuse me, not at a 95% rate. For the students who were in the bottom quarter of the class, it was around a 66% rate. Now, saying that, does that mean that if you happen to find yourself in the bottom quarter of the class, that you cannot pass the bar? No, it does not mean that. But what it does mean is that you have to think about what are the challenges that you had in law school, or maybe it was a bad semester, or maybe it was just a certain classes that you took that were hard on your GPA. What was it about those experiences in terms of how they translate to the bar exam? If say first year was really hard for you, and those sort of core doctrinal courses, contracts or civil procedure or something like that was hard for you, you're going to see those subjects again. So maybe you need to start earlier in terms of your review. Maybe it was just learning how to write essays for professors. The interesting thing is you're going to sort of learn a different style. It's going to be much more IRAC driven perhaps than what you've written, or much more CRAC driven, which means conclusion rule application and conclusion, than what you wrote in law school. But the reality is you have to really think about what those challenges were for you. And this is something that everybody should be doing, particularly if you had classes that you found difficult that are showing up on the bar exam subjects that are going to be tested. So there are plenty of steps here that you can take as to how to address them, and I will send this out afterwards. And you're always welcome to come talk to me or Professor Nakin as well if you want to talk about some of these things. These are not new situations for students. Everybody has some challenge relative to the bar exam, whether it's just learning all the material, whether it's learning how to write for a bar exam audience, whether it's the MBE. Everybody has some challenge. Part of it is just reflecting on that. One of the things that you really need to think about is financially. How are you going to pay for the expenses that you will incur while you're trying to study? Working during the bar exam period when you're trying to study creates a risk factor for a student, and I would really counsel you not to do that. Right? I would encourage you to try to save money now. I know that's hard. All you guys, it's expensive to go to law school, and obviously you have to live now. But at the same time, when you think about the amount of time that you need to study, and then also the time that you need to recuperate, relaxation is as much an important part of maintaining wellness as much a part of being successful in the bar exam. When you think about these things, you have to think about not working and sort of managing your time in a way that is smart. When you take on a job, it obviously eats into the amount of time that you can study, and obviously if you don't know where your money is coming from while you're trying to study for the bar exam, that creates a risk factor. So some financial planning, obviously we're doing a presentation on that right now, thinking about your full expenses. One of the things that we found last year is that we had a significant number of students who just really had no idea where they were going to seek funding for those summer months. I would hope that you guys would not be in that category. We can offer some support through the school, but it's limited what we can do. So some financial planning is certainly a good idea. And the other thing to think about as you approach all of this is, studying for the bar can be a very inexpensive time in your life, but something like the bar review course, there are, in taking the bar exam, paying just to take the bar exam, like in a state like California, it's over $1,000 just to apply to sit for the bar exam. So this is not necessarily a cheap process. So sitting down, writing out the expenses is worth your time. So just a couple more as you sort of think about it. These two are actually related, as you might guess. A lot of people, so get nervous about the bar exam, and what do you think their response is? Okay, get stressed out, can't sleep. One response is to right? Because it's really well intentioned, but people ultimately end up burning themselves out very, very quickly. You'll hear repeatedly that it's the whole, like you've heard in law school, like the marathon, sprint. Bar exam, it can be kind of, it's not just kind of, it can be a fairly intense process in terms of the amount of material you're learning in a fairly compressed amount of time. But your bar review course, whichever you choose to take, is going to give you a plan. And I would encourage you to stick to that one plan. Don't try to do multiple things. Just do the plan that they have given you. Oftentimes when people get derailed, they start doing that plan and then somebody else gave them some notes, they'll try to do that, and then they'll sign up for something else, and they ultimately get distracted, and they end up doing 3 things, but none of them in sufficient detail to actually really be successful on the bar exam. And so, I would counsel you to find a plan. Obviously, your bar review provider is going to give you that, and just work that plan. When we've seen students get in trouble in recent years, it's when they vary from the plan. Sometimes it's well intentioned. It's just they go off and start doing something else, or they just don't do what the bar review provider told them to do. I think that's the other thing that is always surprising to us when we look at. Now we get information from the bar review providers as to what students have done in terms of preparing for the bar exam, because so much of what you guys will do is online, and they can track your progress, right? And we ultimately see that. The students who struggle oftentimes have done very little of what they were counseled to do by the bar review provider. So if you follow those steps, you will be in a position to be successful on the bar exam. That's the job of the bar review provider. They put this plan together so that you will be successful. So take some faith in that and understand that it's a good plan and that they have been training people to pass the bar exam for quite a while. The 3 companies that our students work with, primarily Barbary, Kaplan, and Themis. Themis is relatively new, but has had good success in recent years since starting. And obviously the others have been around for a little bit longer, but they all are in this business of preparing people for the bar exam. So take some faith in that. The other thing, and you will see this happen, is obviously excessive anxiety about failing. You guys understand that you can't control that outcome. The only thing that you can control is the preparation that you put in. So again, a lot of this is about having a plan and just generally taking care of yourself. All right. So most of you guys have already decided where you're going to take the bar exam, which is great. Some basic factors to think about. The one thing that I will say that is a little bit controversial is this last point regarding bar exam statistics. It's not necessarily predictive of your experience, right? Just because 80% of people passed it on the July bar exam does not mean that you have an 80% chance of passing, right? Your experience, you're either going to pass or you're not going to pass. One of the things that may be worth thinking about is, what is the reputation of that bar exam? How hard is it generally? How does it intersect with your career choices? Is it a place that you really want to be? A lot of times we have people just take Virginia by default. I would encourage you not to do that. Put some thought into this. Don't end up taking Virginia simply because it has a very late deadline, right? Which I know this sounds crazy, but Professor Knack can tell you this is absolutely true. Virginia has a May 10 deadline, and we have people just go down to Roanoke to sit for the bar exam because it was literally the only bar exam they could still apply for. So please do not be in that number. If you want to be in Virginia, that's great. But if you don't know where else to be, it's not a bar exam just to choose to take it because you weren't quite sure where else you wanted to go. It's a very challenging bar. So how many of you take it in? Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Virginia tests 29 subject areas. So when you're looking at different bars, look at that. That's a whole lot of areas. Okay? That's like twice as many as some states. And we have a reputation of being, the 5th or 6th hardest bar in the country. So, really don't default to us unless you're looking.
Yeah, and Virginia takes great pride in being a weird bar, and the format is very different than what you see. Also, in being takes great pride in holding on to words that you don't see in a lot of bar exams, asking you strange questions from time to time. How many of you guys have taken MPRE? Okay, all right. So I know the dean's pet peeves and sort of my pet peeve is that people will sit for the bar exam without having taken the MPRE, which is just like absolutely insane because you can't practice, right? Because you still have to take this thing, which there's no reason to do that. We had students go take the bar exam this year without having taken the MPRE first, which I don't know what the explanation of that might be. It's 60 questions, 2 hours. It's relatively inexpensive. For you folks who have not taken it yet, the two best dates obviously are this upcoming November. It's still possible. You got 2 days. It's really not a complicated application. You go to ncbex.org if you want to apply. And it's $140, but if you wanted to apply for the ones that are in 2014, December is the first time you can apply. Just a little bit about it. It's on a scaled score between 50 and 150. What you'll see is that a lot of states, the max that almost any state will require on this particular test is 85, and the median is at 100. Now, I will say that studying for the MPRE is not necessarily, it's not a good indicator of what studying for the bar exam is going to be like. All right, some of you may be disappointed to hear that news. I think most students find that the MPRE, in terms of preparation, is a little bit easier, obviously. The test itself, I don't know if this resonates with those of you who've already taken it, it always, to me and to a lot of my classmates, felt very different than the practice questions that we did. But it's based on the ABA model rules of professional conduct and the rules of judicial conduct. And just to give you a sense of what you have to have in states that are fairly popular with our students, California is obviously the highest there with 86, but most of the states are somewhere between 75 and 85. If any of you guys thinking about practicing in DC, waiting in DC? Okay, so to do that, you need a 75 on the MPRE. If you think about going to Maryland, does not require the MPRE. However, 47 other states do. So I would not encourage you to not take the MPRE because you're planning to practice for the rest of your life in Baltimore. I would still encourage you to take it. And there's some basic guidance regarding the timing of the MPRE. So the MBE, we talked a little bit about it. So it's 200 questions, 190 of which are real questions. There's 10 experimental questions. 3 hours in the morning, 3 hours in the afternoon. The subjects that are tested are right there. For those of you who may be taking a bar exam, obviously all you guys are planning to take the July exam, but if you were to retest in another state or jurisdiction, if they require you to take the MBE, every state is different in terms of reciprocity and maybe what's required of people who are already licensed in another state. Still, a procedure will be added in February 2015. So that may be even more reason for you guys to go ahead and take the July 2014 exam. In terms of the breakdown between criminal law and criminal procedure, about 40% of the questions typically come from criminal procedure. It's about 13 out of the possible 31. And again, the challenge with the MBE is that you not only have to figure out which of these subjects it is, but which of the issues within the subject is being tested. And I think most people feel like the MBE is getting harder. Now, so to talk a little bit about what these numbers mean. So this sort of goes to Professor Nathan's point, what we were talking about earlier. This is on a scale of 200. So the National Conference of Bar Examiners, every state has sort of a different threshold that they require in terms of passing. Okay, what would constitute a passing score? The National Conference of Bar Examiners has tried to translate all that to a 200-point scale so that you have some relative idea as to what's required to pass in a particular state. All right, so this gives you a sense of where Virginia falls in all of this. And so it's right up there in terms of the hardest states. New York has a reputation as being really hard, but if you look at recent experience with the New York bar exam, the numbers kind of dipped a couple years ago, but in the past 5 years or so, the reputation of the New York bar exam has not necessarily been borne out by the passage rate. So we talked a little bit about DC, for those of you who may be thinking about weighing in. Nobody takes the DC bar. You guys probably know that already. You take a bar in maybe a contiguous jurisdiction, Maryland, Virginia, maybe the New York bar, depending on what your employer requests of you. And then to weigh in, you've got to have at least a 133 on the MBE and an MPRE score of 75, and then graduate from ABA approved law school, which you all will do. All right, so the Virginia bar exam. We'll start here because it's the most popular. All right, so the deadline's May 10, very, very late deadline, comparatively speaking. So it's fairly expensive to sit for the Virginia bar, but every state's going to be different on that. Some states relatively expensive. Virginia, I would say, is actually probably somewhere in the middle. The passage rate For July, what you'll notice if you look at passage rates, this is amongst ABA first-time takers. Okay, there are no repeaters. There's also, in some states, you can sit for the bar exam as a graduate of a non-ABA law school. But this is just ABA graduates, first-time takers. You will notice that in February, the passage rate is typically lower than in July. And the breakdown here, I think this is important for you to acknowledge. As you start to do some research about the bar exam, what does this tell you with 40% of the score coming from MPRE and the 60% coming from the essays? You guys have any thoughts on that? Well, okay, so there used to be this idea that you could just do really well in the MPE and pass the bar, and it would be fine. That tells you that you can't do that. Doing well in the MPE is important, but it is not going to be automatic that you just pass the bar. Basically, you're going to still need to write decent essays. It's fairly common for states to have this kind of breakdown and to favor their portion a little bit more heavily than the multi-state portion. I think maybe to get people's attention and also help them realize that they can't just blow off the Virginia section. All right. So Professor Natkin said that there were a lot of things that are tested. This is what's on the Virginia bar exam. In addition to this, you have obviously the multi-state subjects are reflected here. It is a strange bar exam in a lot of ways. There are very few states that test local government law or suretyship. So I'll let you guys just reflect on that for a little while. You're thinking about taking the Virginia bar exam. I will put in a plug here. How many of you are thinking about taking the Virginia bar exam? Okay. If you're taking the Virginia bar exam, you should absolutely take Robin Wood's Virginia Practice and Procedure class. The one thing that we heard, we surveyed students who sat for the Virginia bar, or sat for the bar exam, and all the people who took that class and took the Virginia, you shouldn't take that class if you're not taking the Virginia bar, obviously. All the people who took that class and sat for the Virginia bar said it was incredibly helpful. It's basically like early bar prep on something that is almost guaranteed to be tested. So this is out of basically the last 50 administrations or so, maybe a few more than that. I mean, you almost have a guaranteed chance of getting either a civil procedure or a wills question. The weird thing about this year, there was no wills question. There was a civil procedure question. But this gives you an idea of how frequently some of these things are tested. And again, you could have a question that has multiple parts to it, right? Multiple subjects. I mean, it's very common to have a multiple part question, but multiple subjects within one question. You could have civil procedure, torts, professional responsibility, all wrapped into one question, which is oftentimes different than what you see in law school, where your professor's primarily concentrating on issues just there. Yes?
If anybody wants, I was the representative who went and met with the bar examiners after the administration, and I have the July questions. I would be delighted to email them to you. So those of you who are thinking, or who are on the fence and want to get scared.
All right. So this just gives you an idea of the format of Virginia Bar. Day one, I will say, having gone down to the lunch a few years now, is pretty intense for students, and it probably looks that way. To you guys, just looking at this. Plus, you're generating all the content, you're generating the answers, whereas the second day, you know the answer is somewhere in front of you on the multi-state. So, take a brief digression to talk about bar exam rules. You may not believe it, but this is a highly regulated area of the bar exam experience. And most of this is in response to past experience, somebody doing something crazy or doing something that was completely unanticipated. So Virginia, how many of you guys know that Virginia has a mandatory dress code that you gotta wear a suit? Okay. All right, New York has a lot of rules. And these are probably not the most extreme, but I think every year there are sort of like bar exam horror stories that show up on like bar examiners doing something. One of the stories that came out this year is that at the Saratoga Springs location for the New York bar exam, they said number 2 pencils only, but the bar proctors thought they meant only 2 pencils per person, so they started taking people's pencils. but then somebody came in and said, wait, no, it's a type of pencil. And then they announced and said, everybody, y'all can come up here and get your pencils. We're sorry about that. The Virginia bar, the state portion started really late in the morning session. It was delayed by like an hour and a half, I think. So you have to think about this sort of weird stuff happening. It took them forever to read all the directions to get everybody started. And then what do? They cut their lunch hour, right? So, I mean, part of this is also mentally preparing yourself for, I mean, they still had a lunch break, but it wasn't as expansive as they thought it was going to be. So, just going a little bit more through this. So this is another thing that you will see a lot of, and I just included it here. This is not uncommon it's almost like going through the TSA line, but there's fewer things that you can bring in. So a 1 clear gallon size plastic food storage bag. Obviously somebody brought in a grocery store bag one year, and you're like, well, somebody's maybe. So this gives you an idea as to what you can bring. I think this is always, I mean, just look at the amount of guidance regarding beverage, drink, and resealable clear plastic container. So one of the things that you should do before you take the bar exam, sort of diminish the stress that you are probably going to feel on that day, is to familiarize yourself with all the rules. What typically happens to people is if they haven't read the rules, they get there and they try to bring in something that they can't, and then they are asked to like take that away, or it gets thrown away or something like that, and it's really stressful for somebody. Or they're asked to go put it back in their car or get rid of it, and it's just not something you want to have to deal with. And you know, one of the things that is, and I will say this, one of the things that they do really that bar examiners differ on is this whole wristwatch thing. Some places won't let you have a digital watch that like makes noise or anything like that. I mean, and some places require you can bring in snacks, but they have to be unwrapped. You can bring in candy, have to already be unwrapped. I mean, anything that's going to make noise is going to be a problem. Thus, the quiet snack. So let's talk about the New York bar. And I'm actually going to take a fair amount of time talking about the pro bono requirement. How many of you guys are thinking about taking the New York bar? Okay. How many of you guys knew there was a pro bono requirement? Okay. All right. So the deadline, the New York bar exam is really 2 steps, but the first step happens in April. So they just like this 1 month period where the bar application is available, and then later on there's an additional application step. So the July 2012 passage rate was 83%. Again, the minimum passing score is a scaled score, and the breakdown, and that's off on the 200-point scale. The breakdown is very similar to Virginia. So this is the first time we've seen what's called an MPT, and you guys know what an MPT is. It's a multi-state performance test. What it is essentially, it's a fixed closed universe of documents where you're asked to do something that looks like lawyering. You draft a letter to a client, maybe write a motion, you may have to draft a memo to a supervising partner based upon the documents that you get there. You have 90 minutes to do it. So it's as much a time management exercise as anything. But some of the states that we'll encounter here, New York, Pennsylvania, Georgia, they all have this component. And New York also is one of the states that has its own multiple choice questions, independent of the MPRE, so it's New York specific multiple choice. They also have a pro bono requirement. Now, one of the things that's interesting is this last point. How many of you guys that knew about this felt like you were probably going to be subject to this rule? Okay. All right. So if you're graduating May 2014, the guidance from the New York bar is that you will likely be subject to the pro bono requirement. The reason they can't answer that question definitively is because it has a little bit to do with when you swear in for the bar. But if you're going to swear in after January 1, which in New York is actually fairly common for people who sit for the July exam, because it takes them so long to get the character and fitness stuff processed, you should basically assume that you're going to have to meet the character and fitness, the pro bono requirement, and submit the affidavit. Okay. All right. So it's a 50-hour requirement, and again, even though this is all taken from their website, from the FAQs, there are a lot of from a law school standpoint, it's a little bit challenging to advise students on this because all we have is the guidance from the New New York bar, and nobody has gone through this yet. So you will likely be the first students to have gone through it. All right. So again, and this sort of hits the point that I was talking about earlier. If you're going to be admitted after January 2015, which you guys may very well if you're sitting for the New York bar exam this July, this is going to apply to you. Okay, so what's the test that they're going to use for the pro bono requirement? It's got to be law related. Okay, so there's some general guidance as use of legal skills, and this point right here, the second point, is the one that they repeat over and over again when assessing whether or not something, they have all these sort of hypotheticals, would this particular thing constitute pro bono work? And what they continually return to is this idea that this particular thing was done to enhance the provision of legal services to people who otherwise would not have had access to them. So that seems to be the primary test. One, is it law related? Two, is it about this sort of real pro bono work for people who couldn't have otherwise accessed legal services? And there's some examples there. The other one is that you have to be supervised by someone who fits this description. The reason for that is that when you submit your hours and you say, this is the thing that I've done, or these are the things that I've done, every lawyer who supervised you, let's imagine you did 3 different projects to equal your 50 hours, and you were supervised by different people. Each person is going to have to certify that your description and the characterization of the work, the timing of the work is accurate. So that is the other part of it, right? It's not only your representation regarding the work, but the supervision component kicks in the affidavit process as well. Yeah, Adrian.
So I'm working for a judge. So just because that doesn't count for this law school's law-related service, I mean, it would still count for this law-related service.
It's my sense that it would, right? Because you're using legal skills. Yeah.
It counts for the law school one. I'm not sure. You and I need to look at the New York thing. It's linked on the academic success page and on the law-related service page. I'm not sure that it does.
Well, it's hard to say because they do use this example of like the case of a clerkship or an externship, and it's on their website as one of the things.
Oh, okay. All right. Then you pulled that directly from there?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because it's one of the supervisors you could have.
Right.
So it's possible is about as far as I can say.
Well, let's walk through it. Come sit in my office. We'll walk through it. I will say our law-related service requirement is broader than New York's.
Right, because I'm getting credit as my judicial externship will count for our law-related service.
That's correct. But it might count for theirs, right? And so the same thing with CLPC or CJC or PC3 or anything, or immigration, any of those things where you're providing a direct service is going to qualify regardless of the academic credit.
Yeah. And you can even get paid and receive credit for it. You just cannot receive a bonus. I don't necessarily know how they came up with some of these things. But again, one of the things that they have also counseled is that students complete most of their hours with one supervising attorney or faculty member. They have said that they think that there's value in repeated experiences and repeated exposure and working closely with someone. It also will make it cleaner when you submit the affidavit. Now that's just their professional advice. It doesn't mean that you have to do it that way. But that is one of the things that's also in the document. They have a 16-page FAQ on this up on their website, which I really think if you're thinking about going to New York and you have questions, and again, the difficult thing for us as a school counseling folks on this stuff is that we haven't had students do X, Y, and Z and go through this process. So unfortunately, you guys are going to be likely the first generation of law students to go through this. And I will email the document out so you guys don't have to copy down these web addresses. So coming back, checking back in with what's tested on the New York bar, as you see, it's a lot of stuff, right? It's right up there with Virginia. This doesn't affect you guys, but if you were, say, choosing to take perhaps the New York bar exam in a later life, administrative law will be on the bar exam effective February 2015. So you guys are looking to finally use that APLP class on a bar exam, just missed your opportunity. So a little bit about the structure. One of the things about the bar exam, I talked a little bit about the MPRE being sort of challenging, but it's like a tough 2-day period. I mean, you will feel pretty beat after coming out of it. And this, the breakdown of, writing 3 essays and doing 50 multiple choice in 3 hours and 15 minutes, that's just half, that's literally a quarter, that's half of one day's experience. This isn't even a 3-day bar exam, right? There are some of those. For example, California and Texas. And then you have the MPT in the afternoon. The MPT stuff is really just a time management exercise. A lot of people mess up and they don't practice the MPT at all because they think, okay, well, I don't have to know anything substantively for this, so I'm not going to worry about it. And then they get into it and they find that they're just moving more slowly through the experience than they thought, and they don't finish it. And they basically leave points out there on the table because they didn't complete this exercise. If you just complete it and do decent work product, you will be fine. If you don't finish it, that's when it starts to create a problem for students. So please do practice. So this is out of 60 possible administrations of the New York bar exam as to what is tested most frequently. So you guys kind of have a sense of what they think is important. It doesn't mean that you're absolutely going to get these questions. They could always decide not to have one on a certain year, but there are some things that you can sort of reliably expect to get tested on the New York bar. Unfortunately, we don't have that information for every bar exam. I tried to do a Google search for pretty much everyone. Or the ones that I'm talking about here. Anyone that I could find something on, I've included. So the Maryland bar is the earliest deadline we've seen thus far. Any of you guys think about going to Maryland? Probably not. This is on the hands about it. Yeah. So it's January 16th. In terms of the breakdown, again, it's heavily weighted towards the state portion, and it's 58% essay, 7% MPT. So this sort of gives you a sense of like the day of the state portion. So just think about the time management component of 7 25-minute essay questions. It's 1 2-hour and 55-minute session. That's a lot for people to do. And then in the afternoon, obviously, 4 25-minute essays. But that's very different than the kind of essays you've probably written in law school. You may be used to these gigantic issue spotter questions where you have maybe 45 minutes or an hour to work on them. 25 minutes, you're going to have to move much more quickly through those. Then obviously you have the MB in the afternoon. Fewer subjects tested on Maryland test. And if you ever decided that you want to take Maryland, they have a very good website that will pass. They have a fair amount of guidance from the Maryland bar examiners, which unfortunately you can't say for every bar. You can't say that for Virginia. Not a whole lot of guidance from the Virginia bar examiners, other than rules and regulations. But past questions, we have past Virginia questions up on our website if you wanted to look at them. Obviously, Professor Nacken was going to send around the July 2013 questions. And this is this is 30 possible administrations over the past, since about 1995 or so, as to what's tested most frequently. So, just a quick aside here. So this may make you think like there's some predictive value in this stuff, but please do not be one of those people who studies for the bar and chooses to roll the dice on they're going to test something or not test something, because you don't want it to be that one year where like they finally ask that secure transactions question, even though they only asked it 11 times or whatever. You can't really plan that way. You really do just need to take the time. And stuff that's not tested as heavily, you won't spend as much lecture time on it. So theoretically, you won't have to spend as much time learning it as you will some of the MBE subjects and things like that. But do not try to do that calculus because you really never know. And I think bar examiners are sometimes sensitive to people saying like, oh, it's never going to be on the bar exam. I think they're aware of this kind of stuff. And they certainly do ask about some things, but there's enough variation here that you couldn't necessarily go into a bar exam thinking like, oh, they're never going to ask about that particular topic. So again, 2 days, and we walked through that earlier. So California bar, anybody think about taking the California bar? Okay, all right, so it's a 3-day exam. I think if you talk to anybody who's taken it, that's a very long time. And it's, 2 days is hard enough, but 3 days, it's like by the time you get to the 3rd day, I think most people are just, maybe a little bit over it. South Carolina and Texas are also 3 days, or excuse me, Texas says it's 2.5 days. But the half day is like the first day. So like you basically have to be there anyhow. So it's like, I don't know, I mean, maybe it's less bad by making it 2.5 days. All right, so as you can see, this is probably the most expensive bar. Literally just the application that's associated with the bar is just $614. To apply with the character and fitness stuff, it's $500. And then all the bar exams, if you want to use your laptop, most students do type these days. There's an additional laptop fee. There's also, one of the things that you guys should be aware of is that you will have to use ExamSoft or some sort of software that you have likely you've never used. Being a student here, that's very different in terms of using it as an interface to type your responses than just using Word, that sort of thing. It's somewhat similar, but you can get familiar with that before you actually have to take the bar exam. I would encourage you to do that just because it is different than what you experience as law students. Whereas other people in other law schools without the honor system have had to use this all through law school, so it feels very normal and natural to them. So again, the breakdown in California is more heavily favored in terms of the state portion, and they also have 2 MPT questions. All right, so not a tremendous amount of law in the California bar. I think California has just a lot of people taking the bar exam. You don't have to be a graduate of an ABA-approved law school to sit for the California bar. And they have multiple ways of qualifying to sit for the bar exam. So again, it's 3 days. So 3 essay questions and 1 MPT in the afternoon, and the first day. Then you have the MBE, and then you come back again on Thursday, and you do it all over again. So that, I think from a just a wellness standpoint, that raises more challenges than anything. So the Pennsylvania bar, do you guys think about taking this? We've had students take it in the past. All right. Well, all right. So you'll see that most of the bar exams have a timely deadline and have a late deadline. You guys notice anything about Virginia? There's no late deadline. There's one deadline. If it arrives on May 11th, it's late, and therefore you're going to have to sit for the February bar exam. We've had students go through this. One of the things that I would encourage you to do after this presentation, since most of you guys know where you're going, is you should do some research just about the things that you could do in advance to get yourself prepared. A lot of bar examiners require fingerprints, require all this stuff from you. See what you can do now to get started and get the ball rolling. So the Pennsylvania bar, again, more heavily weighted in terms of the state. And there's a fairly significant difference between a timely application and a late application here, right? So the other thing when you're thinking about the cost of taking the bar exam, just applying on time can save you a great deal of money. I mean, that's a $900 difference there. So again, what's tested? There's a fair amount of stuff on the Pennsylvania bar. They also have their own performance test. This gives you a sense of the frequency and stuff. This is since about the mid-90s, and it's out of 32 administrations. So again, some things on which you may be able to rely that they would ask. And they have their own performance test, and it sort of gives you an idea as to how it breaks down there. The North Carolina bar, I will say that it's probably one of those sleeper states in terms of people don't really know a lot about North Carolina bar, and so they take it and they find it's a very hard bar exam. So if you're thinking about going to North Carolina, anybody thinking about going to North Carolina? Okay. It is a challenging bar exam. The other thing is you have a lot of essay questions on the bar exam. A fair number of subjects tested, but you have 12 essays. Right, so you'll see Georgia in a few minutes. You have 4 essays, all right, and 2 MPTs. But here you have 12 essays. So you do 6 per 3-hour session. That's 1 essay per 30 minutes. So it's a lot of writing. All right, so the Georgia bar exam, it's a 2-step process. You apply, they do the character and fitness determination before you apply to sit for the bar exam. The other thing that I will tell you is please don't exclusively rely on any of the dates that I put in here. Do your own due diligence. I've tried to get current information as I could, but spend some time on the bar examiner's website of the state where you are planning to take the bar. You can find information about all of these things. Georgia also has a fairly early deadline, similar to Maryland, and North Carolina also has an early deadline. For those of you thinking about taking the North Carolina bar. So again, this is actually the first state that we've seen that had a 50-50 breakdown in terms of how the multi-state and the essay portion is weighted. But you have to at least score a 115 on the MPRE on a scale score to have anybody grade your essay. So there's a fair amount of law for a limited number of questions on the Georgia exam. I think in terms, I was having this conversation with the Barbary people last year, probably the most law that you have to learn for the least amount of questions tested. And you basically, it's split. You do the 4 essays in the morning, and then you do the MPTs in the the other way around. The morning session is the MPT, and the essay questions are in the afternoon. But they can always change this in a given year. It doesn't mean that this is absolutely written in stone as to how these things are formatted. But obviously, what you guys are picking up on is the first day of the bar exam is typically the state day. The second day is the MPE. Now, any of you guys think about taking multiple states or know anybody that's taking multiple jurisdictions? Okay, so it's sometimes possible, depending upon the timing of an exam, to pair one bar with another. You typically see people do New York, New Jersey, sometimes Boston in combination, actually Massachusetts in combination with the other states around it, maybe Connecticut, something like that, depending upon where you're choosing to practice. The reason why that's possible is that the MPE is offered everywhere on the same day. The states, though, can sometimes choose to offer the state portion after the MPE. New Jersey, for example, I believe does that, so that people can take the New York and New Jersey bar at the same time. In that way, every state is a little bit different about whether or not they'll take a concurrent multi-state examination. Right? So if you sit for the New York bar, and you take the MPE and you take the New Jersey bar at the exact same time, they will take that MPE score in New Jersey even though you did not sit for the MPE there on that particular day. But you should look at the rules of each jurisdiction, and it's not terribly common that people do that, but sometimes people do. But you typically see it most often in the Northeast, where it seems like states do that with more frequency. All right, so the Florida bar, I will say, Virginia has a pretty rough character and fitness process. It's 26 pages. The state that probably has, maybe deservedly, the worst reputation with regard to character and fitness is the Florida bar exam, just in terms of the standards that they seem not to want a lot of people coming down there to practice law. That seems to be the general experience. And they put people through a lot of hoops and a lot of hurdles, with particular regard to the character and fitness process. That is not a cakewalk in any state these days. One of the things that you should know about the character and fitness process generally is that there are states that at least at a minimum require your application here. Some states may require your application to every school to which you apply. So when you think about that, every law school to which you apply, our average applicant applies to about 15 schools these days. But what does that mean in terms of your particular file? One, if you have been arrested or you've gotten a speeding ticket or there's anything that you need to update your student file with, you need to send me an email with that. If you're not sure if it's in your student file, contact me. I'll be happy to look in your student file and say, no, we don't have a record of that particular thing. You need to send me an email. What happens if you don't have your file updated and you disclose something to the bar examiners, but it's not in your student file and you should disclose it to us? It literally stops your character and fitness evaluation at that point. And they come back to us and they say, so-and-so disclosed this to us, but we noticed that it wasn't in the materials that you sent us. Would you still have permitted this student to remain a student? Would they still have been able to graduate from here? We have to draft a letter, we have to sign it, we have to fax it back to the person. And then they start your character and fitness process again with this information from us. But it's the last thing that you want to be dealing with while you're trying to study for the bar exam, because all of this is happening concurrently. So you really don't want to be dealing with this. So Virginia does require parking tickets. We don't require parking.
No, I'm just like, so we don't have to put it in the school file.
No, we don't ask for parking tickets, but there are bar examiners that do. Virginia is one of them.
How do you find this information? I mean, I have speeding tickets. I mean, I don't know.
You might want to go to your DMV, of your DMV website of the state of licensure.
Okay.
That's where I would tell you to start off initially. But you may also want to try to really remember, like, think about it. I mean, you know what I'm saying? Because your DMV record may not be
there are
complete.
times when I've gone to court and they dismissed the ticket, and like, you know, does that even matter then?
It may. We say that we're still interested in it unless it's been expunged. So
Well, that is expunged, I assume, unless it's served.
no, it's not the same. It's not expunged.
You're going to jail, brother.
Yeah. Maybe.
The best thing to do is to go to the DMV and get them to print the record. They will do it. There's a fee for it.
Yeah.
But because states share those records, that's the most accurate way of getting it.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is maybe really stupid, but what if you wanted to get from campus security?
Still can.
As a moving violation?
Yeah, I think it's still. It's not on your driving record. I would tell you to still include it in your student file
Okay.
because they may ask something about who you've been disciplined or something like that.
Can we look at our student file while we're doing our application just to make sure it's like exactly the same? Will you guys look at it?
I'll at least tell you what we have on record. I can tell you that. Yeah. Yeah.
What about like red light cameras?
That would count. That would count. I mean, most of them are interested in moving violations, and it's running a red light.
But like they don't even know who's driving your car.
All I can tell you is it's better to have it in there than not in there. You really, I mean, I just understand that this may mean a lot of work, but it is September. You guys have a fair amount of time before this, and you really don't want to be dealing with this while you're trying to study for the bar exam. It's a pain to put this application together. It's a pain to also deal with anything that comes up like this, where they're basically saying, "Hey, why didn't you disclose this to us? You should have disclosed it to your law school. You should have disclosed it to us. We have a problem now with your application." Yeah.
And one more thing, the other thing that is often difficult is putting all your addresses together for the past 10-ish
Yeah.
years. Parents are a good source if your parents still have, the address book, they cross through it, but start compiling that for yourself as well. It's a bother. But I will tell you that my friend Ross Newell, who still practices in Stanton, for 2 summers had his address as mile marker 11 at Kildover Hills in North Carolina, and they allowed him to practice law. So, just be as accurate as you can.
So one of the things we will have the Virginia Character and Fitness Chair on campus in early November, and he answered a lot of these questions, and he will be happy to answer them. He'll tell you straight up about whether or not you need to disclose that, or whether, I mean, even if you're not taking the Virginia bar, I mean, he goes to these conferences. They talk about this stuff a lot together. It's worth coming to. So just moving quickly, anybody taking the Texas bar? Okay, all right, so Preston, you might. So it's a 3-day bar. It's got a procedure and evidence exam, which is the only time I've seen that on a bar exam. It's certainly its own thing. You probably would expect Texas to be distinctive and different in some way. It also has an early deadline. Of course, if you wanted to pay a late fee, you could. So this gives you a sense of what's on the procedure and evidence exam, what's on the Texas essays. One of the things that if I'm sorry, that should not have been including oil and gas. It should have been including community property. Real property, including oil and gas, is definitely on the Texas bar. So 3 days. The first day is considered the half day where you have the MPT and the procedure and evidence exam. And then day 3, very similar to North Carolina, you have 12 essay questions. So it's a fair of an exam. So some basic resources. I will, again, email this out. So what can you do now? So most of you guys know where it seemed like a lot of you had an idea. You got to figure out where you're going to take the bar exam. I know that this can sometimes be difficult if you're still trying to figure out where your job is going to be. At least narrow that down to 1 or 2 states so it's manageable. We had a lot of students thinking about 5, 6 different jurisdictions. There's no way you can do an effective job search in that many different places. So try to narrow the universe of possibilities down to 2, so you can try to avoid paying some of these late fees, because it can get quite expensive. The other thing is, spend some time on the website of the bar you're planning to take. See if you can answer these just basic questions. You know, what's the deadline? What's the format of the exam? What's being tested? How's the exam scored? Do they have other questions that are available? We have put a lot of them for some of the more popular states that our students have taken on our website, but also spend some time, and I'll include a link to that in the email with this PowerPoint. Again, we talked about starting the character and fitness stuff early, planning financially, sign up for a bar review course. How many of you guys have signed up for a bar review course already? Okay, so we're going to have a day on October 9th, and we're going to have all three of the popular is, I guess, a relative thing, but I guess in terms of our students' use of bar review courses, the three most popular with students, so that's Barbary, Kaplan, and Themis. And they're going to be here, they're going to make sort of a general presentation, because we get a lot of questions from students as to which is better than the other. That's really a subjective determination for you guys, but at least that way you can figure out which of these things to intersect with your learning style, learning preference, how you want to go about studying for the bar. And then the last thing I'm going to say is think about your courses for next semester. You may not necessarily feel like you have a lot of flexibility in your schedule. But to the extent that you do, one of the things that we heard from students who sat for the bar is that they found it helpful to have taken a traditional course in their third year. I don't know how many of you guys may be doing this already, but that's what gives you a general sense of the response that we received. We got responses from 23 students, and these are the classes that they said that they found helpful for the bar exam, sort of taking out all the multi-state stuff. Now, some of this stuff you may have already taken, but if you haven't taken a uniform commercial code class, say Article 2 or something like that, if you're thinking about taking Virginia practice and procedure, we heard from a lot of people, family law, remedies, anything that's listed here. And obviously the externships and practicum courses are there just to help you understand that some of the stuff that you may be doing there could be helpful and relevant, particularly for, say, an APT, or even for the civil procedure questions that you may get, particularly if you're going to take Virginia. We heard from a lot of students if they were working in a placement where they were working on Virginia civil procedure, issued a lot, writing about that, reflecting on that a lot, that it was helpful. So this is just a plug for taking something that may ultimately be tested on the bar exam of the state where you're going if you have any elective room in your second semester of your third year. And again, you're taking a Virginia bar, please take Virginia practice and procedure with Professor Wood. Any questions I can answer for anybody? Okay, I know that was a lot. Oh, yeah, Wood.
Excuse if this sounds like an insane question. How feasible is it to sort of hold an option open on more than one bar exam? Like, is it possible to register for more than one bar exam? If the cost is not an option, and then assuming, of course, that you're only going to show up for one of them.
There's probably not going to be a lot of, it's probably a ton of work for you, I would say, just from the character and fitness standpoint. You're going to have to put all of this documentation together for 2 bars. I would try to get it to 1 if you can. It also could be potentially very expensive. I would really counsel you not to do that if there's a way. I mean, come by, we can talk about it. There's a way to avoid that. I would, if I was you. If you feel like you have the ability to do that, because that's going to be a real headache for you trying to navigate 2 processes, 2 different sets of deadlines, 2 different character and fitness requirements. Because every state's different. I think that's hopefully what you guys got from this presentation, is that no 2 states do any of this stuff the same. So, but come by, we'll talk about it. Yeah, David.
Do you know if we've had any recent grads that have experience with the UBE?
That is a good question. I'll have to look at the jurisdictions and see if we've had anybody go there. Where are you thinking about going? Arizona, okay.
And they just started that this year?
Yeah.
The one, the MPT?
No, the UB. Yeah.
And there are, what, 12 states now?
Yeah, there are states that do what's called the MPRE.
Minnesota?
Yeah, there are a few. I'll have to look and see where we've had students go and how that intersects with where the UB is offered. There are more states now that do the multi-state essay examination as well. So I will take a look at that for you. It's a good question. Other questions? All right, well, thank you for coming and for hanging in for a longer presentation. Hopefully you guys will come back on the 30th. We'll talk about financial planning. We'll send out emails about this But please make sure you signed in for today. We are going to be wrapping up an iPad at some point. So thanks again.
Thank you.